uyakwazi ukuthumela ama-email now.
We translate for those who can't understand. We write for those who can't hear. We describe for those who can't see. Subti, subtitles and accessibility for film, television and theatre. Subti.com.
Fred.
Hello and welcome to Fred Film Radio. I'm Amani Mohammed.
Fred Film Radio, sono Paolo De Marchi.
簡単にその先生の作品の紹介を。
Fred Film Radio, Sundana Night.
Clémence Ferry-Latour pour Fred Film Radio, en direct du Festival de Cannes.
Fred, the festival experience in 23 languages.
People of the universe, welcome back to a brand new episode of the Big Fred Tuesday. Fred Film Radio's weekly radio show on all things cinema. Back after a break to facilitate our extensive coverage of the Venice International Film Festival, during which, over the course of 10 exciting days, we brought you interviews with several of the guests attending, many of whom presented films across all sections of the festival. To check out all of our interview or podcast content, visit fred.fm, and you can also check out some of our video interviews with such renowned guests as Tilda Swinton, Pedro Almodovar, and Matt Dillon on our YouTube channel, which you will be able to find by searching Fred Film Radio on YouTube. Actually, the latter actor, Matt Dillon, was one of our Fred Award winners in Venice this year, alongside Italian actress Jasmine Trinca. And we have an interview with her on Fred as well. But for now, how rude of me, I failed to introduce myself. My name is Matt Micucci. I have been a long-time collaborator of Fred Film Radio. I too covered the Venice International Film Festival. And later on, over the course of the show, I will share with you 5 of my favourite films that were presented on the Lido di Venezia this year. But for now, I think it's only right to take a look at the list of the main prize winners of the Venice International Film Festival, which was the 77th in its glorious history and marked the first time a major international film festival held a physical edition since the coronavirus outbreak. Awards in the official competition were chosen by a jury presided by Cate Blanchett, and the top prize, the prestigious Golden Lion Award, went to Nomadland by Chloe Zhao from the United States. The Grand Jury Prize went to New Order by Michel Franco. The Silver Lion for Best Director went to Kiyoshi Kurosawa for Wife of a Spy. Acting awards, the Coppa Volpi, went to both Vanessa Kirby for Pieces of a Woman and Pier Francesco Favino for Padre Nostro. The top winning film for the Orizzonti section was The Wasteland by Ahmed Bahrami from Iran. As far as the independent and parallel sections go, the top award for the International Critics Week went to Turkish drama Ghosts by Azra Deniz Okyay. And for the Giornate degli Autori strand, the top winner was The Whaler Boy by Philip Yuriev from Russia. Let me remind you that the winning film of the Giornate degli Autori was chosen by a jury composed of young cinephiles acting as ambassadors for each one of the European Union countries as part of a long-standing European Parliament-supported cultural initiative named 27 Times Cinema, which brings a young cinephile from each of the countries of the European Union to the Venice International Film Festival every year. And guess what? We have interviews with them as well. So, now that we have covered some of the major awards assigned at this year's Venice International Film Festival, let me tell you that coming up will be an interview with Logan George and Celine Held, the directors of a film presented in Venice, in the Venice International Critics Week section. The film is titled Topside and was certainly one of the highlights of the programme. I also remind you that during the course of the show, we will be revisiting some of our highlight interviews from the festival as well, so stay tuned for that. Also, we are very excited about a new EU-funded initiative promoting film literacy, a film education platform named European Film Factory. To mark its launch, we will be joined by Emilie Boucheteil, head of cinema of the French Institute, which is the project leader of this Europe-wide project. But we will also be joined by acclaimed animation filmmaker and co-founder of the Irish-based animation studio Cartoon Saloon, Tomm Moore, whose film Brandon and the Secret of Kells, also known simply by The Secret of Kells, is part of the European Film Factory project. So as you can see, folks, we have quite a rich lineup for this episode of the Big Fred Tuesday. So here's my suggestion. Sit back, relax, maybe grab yourself a bag of M&Ms if you're that way inclined, or just do your thing, but continue to stay tuned because we've got some real awesome film conversation coming up, and we'll be ready to get this show on the road in a moment.
Fred.
As mentioned earlier on this episode of the Big Fred Tuesday, Fred Film Radio has just wrapped up coverage of the Venice International Film Festival, and extensive coverage that included interviews with various guests of the festival who presented films within its programme. But we have some left over for you, including one of the highlights of this year's programme for the International Critics Week Strand. The film is titled Topside, and joining us at this time are its directors, Celine Held and Logan George, to tell us all about it. Celine and Logan, welcome to the Big Fred Tuesday.
Thank you so much for having us. We're so excited to be here.
Yeah.
I'm excited to talk about your film Topside, recently presented within the programme of the International Critics Week of the Venice International Film Festival. Before we get to talk about it a little bit, this might be the first time that Fred Film Radio actually chats with you guys. So I'd like to know a little bit about yourselves, and how did you two meet, and where did that creative partnership begin?
We met at New York University in 2010. Mm-hmm. We were both majoring in drama at the time. We both kind of pursued separate acting careers after we graduated from college in 2012. But I actually had been writing the script for Topside for a super long time, really had the kind of first nugget of an idea in 2012. And shared the script with Logan that is very different from the product that you see on screen in front of you now in 2014. So we really started working together professionally in any kind of creative sense with the kind of beginnings of this idea for Topside.
Right. So Topside brought you back together.
Yeah, in a lot of respects. And like all the shorts that we wrote and directed beforehand were really building towards this feature. It was us sort of proving ourselves as writers and directors. But we had this script before anything else.
Well, it is a great film. I watched it, thought it was very powerful. So some of our listeners may not be familiar with it because it's such a new film. Would you like to maybe say a few words to kind of introduce the story for our listeners, and then we'll get into talking about it in more detail?
Yeah, sure. It follows a young 5-year-old who's living in the tunnels with her mother, the tunnels of New York City, and there is a sort of police mandated eviction that's taking place in this community that they've been living in underground, and they're forced up into a brutal winter night taking place in New York City, and it's about them sort of struggling to stay together over the course of that night.
One of the things that I would like to just maybe ask you as a follow-up question is, how difficult is it to shoot in the New York City underground?
Well, Logan and I did a lot of research in going to the tunnels a lot. There's one tunnel in particular, the Freedom Tunnel, that stretches from 125th Street down to 72nd on the west side of New York. This tunnel was home to hundreds of people in the 80s and 90s before this same eviction that we show in our film took place. So unfortunately, we could not shoot in this tunnel. It's now an active Amtrak train tunnel. But we did find a tunnel in Rochester, New York, that was built around the same decade. And we actually found the graffiti artist. His name's Chris Pape. His graffiti name is Freedom. He is who the Freedom Tunnel is named for. And he came to Rochester. He worked with us on our script in making sure it portrayed the tunnel in the most accurate way possible. And he came up and recreated a lot of his original murals that dot the Freedom Tunnel and make it just this almost museum-like, cathedral-like place. He recreated those pieces and did a few original pieces too. So we tried to bring as much from that original tunnel as we could to Rochester. We did, however, shoot in all of the New York City subway. That was all in New York City, all the subway work, which is also the underground, but not quite as underground.
Wow. And in terms of the narrative, I see it very much as a story about people living on the edge of society. Would you agree with that? And what sort of draws you to this type of to exploring such stories?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what what we talked about a lot and what we were trying to build was something that could feel immersive as far as someone tracking along and getting a sense of the desperation that you can sort of find yourself in when you're operating under restrictions like this and living on the fringe in that way. So it's a natural part of living in any kind of urban environment. When you're below the poverty line, there's just factors that you can't really account for until you're faced with those type of circumstances. So our goal was to sort of, most of the film plays out in a sense of real time, not over weeks or months or anything, but those sort of day to day, moment to moment decisions that can force your hand and lead you to do certain things.
This may be a strange question to ask, but can you understand, you mentioned desperation. How do you sort of understand that level of desperation? Is there research involved? Do you draw from personal experience?
So, yes. So what kind of propelled me into wanting to write this story is I was working at a kindergarten on the Lower East Side through a program here called AmeriCorps with children who were mostly living below the poverty line. There was a child in one of my classes who was actually removed by Child Protective Services, which is called ACS here in New York, one day. And we found out later that his mother had been applying for jobs and marking that she was had no permanent place to live, but she also had a dependent. So ACS came in and removed her child and placed him within this system, which is kind of this purgatory before foster care or eventual adoption. And it really, I just had no idea. 80% of the homeless in New York are families. So we started this kind of intensive research. We actually made 2 documentary series, one of which was supposed to premiere at South by also this March, and the other, which we're just finishing up the process of editing. The first explores street homelessness, people currently experiencing homelessness who live on the street, which is kind of our understanding of what homelessness is, kind of. But the second explores mothers and children who live in the shelter system. This is such a huge part of homelessness in New York that I think is so often ignored. They look like anybody else. You would never know. And I think that, these shelters don't have Wi-Fi, don't have washers, dryers. There are like these really specific things that they just don't, things that should be available for all people. So in doing this research, we just felt like we wanted to explore a story like this through this lens of living in a tunnel, of something that was cinematic that we hadn't seen before. But ultimately, it was an exploration of childhood homelessness that was born from really about 3 years of documentary research before we kind of really reworked the script and reworked our understanding of homelessness.
Right. And, you mentioned it was something that hadn't really been seen before cinematically. I find, and I was going to ask this actually, that what you mentioned, the theme of motherhood too, it feels like a very fresh take on the theme of motherhood, cinematically speaking. Would you agree?
Yes. Well, we didn't want to paint in any sort of broad strokes and, sort of cast the mother character with, vast amounts of sympathy, but then also didn't want to be wagging, our finger at her in any way. It's all of these situations. They're just like, there's so much nuance and complexity to a lot of these stories, to a lot of the people that we talk to. You can really dive deep. So it was our goal. It's part of the reason why we also never dive into the backstories of the characters either.
In that big of a way.
Yeah.
We just didn't want to put Nikki, the mother, in this place where you were able to judge her and say, well, if I was in that situation, but just to give empathy. I think that this universal condition of unconditional love is what we wanted to explore. And it's through all these different lenses, it's through all these different circumstances. But we do hope that our audiences can look at this mother, this child, and feel compassion, feel an empathy, and feel also that they recognize, they understand what that love is.
Topside, certainly one of the highlights from this year's Venice International Film Festival programme, and we will be back to talk more about it with Logan George and Celine Held in a moment. Fred. We're back. You're listening to the Big Fred Tuesday, and I am still with Celine Held and Logan George, directors of Topside, a very powerful film presented within the programme of International Critics Week at this year's Venice International Film Festival. And as you heard earlier, this is a very powerful drama exploring such themes as homelessness, motherhood, and the stories of lives of people living on the edge of society. Actually, Celine, you play the role of Nikki, the mother and one of the central characters of the film. And of course, your co-star is a young and very talented girl. Her name is Little in the film, but can you tell me a little bit about the casting of this part? And first of all, what is her name? I wouldn't want to mispronounce it.
Her name is Shayla. I know it's spelled with a Z, but you pronounce it just with an SH. So her name is Shayla Farmer. Yes, isn't she amazing? We even are blown away sometimes when we've seen the film too many times and we haven't even seen it in theaters ever. So when we watch little bits and pieces, sometimes we look and say, "Is that really happened? That she really did that?" So she is amazing. We found her through casting director Jennifer Venditti, who was doing a casting for the show Euphoria in a church, and Shayla and her family walked in. And she has 4 other siblings. She's a middle child of 4 other siblings. And Jennifer had read our script the night before and saw Shayla and just said, "This is Little." We hadn't even signed anything with Jennifer, weren't working with her officially yet. She put Shayla on tape, and then our first meeting with Jennifer, she showed us Shayla, and we were just blown away. We did have to audition about 100 other girls for our financier at the time, but Shayla she has just this way of kind of watching, being aware. I think there's your normal 5-year-old, your normal 6-year-old. They're precocious a little. They're talkative. They want to tell you so much that's going on in their lives. But Shayla is really good at watching. We went through a lot with Shayla and her family. We got very close to them because we ended up losing our financing for the film. It was supposed to shoot that October, and we were already so close to them. We had hooked up with this really great family that was providing tutoring services for Shayla and her siblings. I was taking them to tutoring twice a week. We would go on adventures all the time. And Shayla and I had started to build this vocabulary in this world. So when we lost the financing, we thought, okay, we love them. They live 10 minutes away from us. Like, we don't really see giving this up. So let's just dive in. Let's just see what happens as much as they're okay with. And continue this relationship and see if we can get financing for Shayla to still play this role. And we did. We were able to get it within the next couple months. So we rewrote the role to suit who Shayla is. We worked on set with her in a 360-degree environment. We rarely called cut. We did very long takes so she could really just be herself, get into the character. And I wore a small little earpiece on set so that Logan could communicate with me and let me know, "Oh, that wasn't in focus, camera trouble. Oh, could you get her to say that again?" Shayla didn't see a script or memorize things. We just really worked her in preparing these long conversations in pre-production that then again brought up in production.
Let's talk about the style of the film. I found it, I think you mentioned this word earlier, Logan. It's a very immersive film, and I thought that the intensity of the film was amazing. At times it also recalled the films of the American New Wave of the 70s, but it also does feel also very modern. I wondered what might have been the influences regarding the style in which it is shot.
Well, we wanted it to feel found and not particularly crafted, because we knew we were going to be, working with such a young performer too. You're not going to be going for like super elaborate long takes or anything like that. So we knew that there would be lots of editing involved in making it. And we wanted it to feel very doc-like and unformed. We allowed our DP to sort of frame up completely different shots to move around the space. Because again, we tried to keep it all very 360 degrees. And so as a result of that, it was able to hopefully feel just, very authentic.
We obviously love Andrea Arnold with her work with Robbie Ryan is incredible. We love the Safdie brothers. We did look at a lot of more modern work just because we're working on digital. So we were able to do these really long takes. And so looking at film, often a lot of things are kind of on sticks or feel a little bit less immersive in that way, where you really stay with a character for a long period of time. We also just love Jeff Nichols in a lot of his work too.
Are you thinking of the way in which it'll be edited as you are filming it?
Yeah, absolutely. I edited the film, and we're just hyper conscious of that throughout. We sort of, where the climax of the film is, where Nikki is at the end when she's running through the subway stations. We always knew that we were going to be building towards that, and that there would be a real freneticism to that editing pace. So the whole film is really sort of conditioning you to be prepared for that moment, so it's not completely jarring. But yeah, super conscious of the edit through.
Super conscious. Okay, we're out of time, guys. Unfortunately, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you about Topside. I hope you'll get to watch your film on a big screen very soon.
Oh, thank you, Matt.
So
thanks for the
much.
questions.
It's so great talking with you.
Fred Film Radio.
Over the course of the next few Big Fred Tuesday shows, what I'm going to do is I'm going to honor our extensive coverage of the Venice International Film Festival by sharing with you some of its most interesting interviews. But I remind you that this too will only be scraping the surface of said coverage. And if you'd like to check out all and any of our interviews from the 77th Venice International Film Festival, you really should check out Fred.fm and also visit Fred Film Radio's YouTube channel for our video interviews. One of our top interviews of this year was with famed actress Tilda Swinton, who both presented Pedro Almodovar's mid-length film The Human Voice, in which she stars, and also received a Golden Lion for Lifetime Achievement Award. Chiara Nicoletti caught up with her there, and here is that interview.
I have to say that the film felt like a very sensual experience for me, almost tactile, the textures, the colors. And I was wondering, how had you imagined working with Pedro Almodovar? Was it similar to my experience?
It's, I feel my experience of working with Pedro would be exactly the same as you or anybody who knows his cinema. Because we know it so well. We know the rooms, we know the colors, we know the women. And then suddenly, by magic, it's like stepping through a looking glass and it's you. I'm in a Pedro Almodovar set and he's over there and this emotion comes. And then when you see the film and you have the incredible music of Iglesias and you have the incredible credit sequences, it's like being in it's virtual reality. It's virtual reality for me.
Speaking of the set, I love what he made of Human Voice. I mean, in love, sometimes we tend to stage it a little bit, and sometimes we have to burn it all up,
Totally. It's. I think in many ways the film is about sincerity. It's about fakery and fantasy and fiction, and also I think about grief and how to separate and how to tell the truth, not only to yourself but to somebody who has hurt you very badly. And she's an actress. She tells the truth, the real truth, for about a minute in the film.
But Pedro in press conference said that he changed it a little bit, and for example, she's a submissive woman as she was in the play, and that's something that we can relate to.
It's a classic text, and my definition of classic means it can be it's rubbery and elastic, and you can interpret it and reinterpret, and it lasts forever. So it is true that there's something, however hallowed, for example, Rossellini's version with Anna Magnani is, it's phenomenal. But it is interesting to see it now and to hear the sort of supplication of this woman. And I think that it was very important to Pedro to not only make it modern, but also find a solution for her. Because he wanted for her to survive. There's a Donna Summer aspect to the end, definitely. This feeling of survival and this feeling of progress, because can be a sense of claustrophobia around the despair of the Cocteau text. He just wanted to kind of enliven it, I think.
And if there's an Australian Shepherd sharing the suffering with you, the more...
You know, the life spent with a dog is a good life. I know that.
So, do you think that, speaking also about your Golden Lion Award this year, do you think that maybe this was the best year ever to receive such a recognition, a year in which we really rediscovered
I don't know that there would have been a bad year.
Yeah, you're right.
I don't think there would have been a bad year. But, you know, transformation is my motor, and this is a transformational year for all of us. And the feeling of reflection and retrospection, I think we're all, even if it's just going through your old clothes, there's a feeling of, you know, you're going through your old films, whatever, this feeling of re-evaluation and calibration and getting rid of what's no longer serving us, and both on a macro and a micro level, and at societal level and personal level, but also finding real treasure and finding whatever there is in your life and going, no, this is really precious and this is really valuable. So for me, it's like an unimaginable honor, of course, but it's like not a corrective, but it's like a measurement, and it's a real enticement to go forward. It's like the slate is clean now, and I go forward, and I'm really happy to do that, and to have that honor last night, and then to go forward today with Pedro, with our new film, into all this whole new work together is, no, you can't make it up.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much
for being here with us again for the Human Boys at the 77th Venice International Film Festival. I'm Chiara Nicoletti. This is Fred. Festival Inside. Grazie.
Bye-bye.
Fred Film Radio.
On the 26th of August, the French Institute launched a European platform for film education named European Film Factory, supported by the Media Creative Europe programme of the European Commission and developed in partnership with Arte Education and European Schoolnet. The platform is free of charge and accessible to all of the countries participating in Creative Europe, to students and teachers. Here to tell us all about it is the French Institute's Head of Cinema, Emilie Boucheteil. Emilie, welcome to the Big Fred Tuesday.
Thank you very much. Hi.
So this is very exciting, and let's start simple. Would you be able to maybe provide us with an introduction to the European Film Factory?
Yes, of course. It's a platform, and its aim is to promote film education in Europe, especially all about the diversity of European cinema. So the aim of this platform is to provide 10 European films that were important in the film heritage of European cinema, and we give access to those films to teachers all around Europe, around the 34 countries, media countries of the Creative Europe program, as well as to students.
Here's another simple question. I mean, why do you feel like film education is important?
It's very important for us to be able to teach film education in class and to encourage the students and the teachers to go together and see films in the movie theaters. As we know, of course, this project was thought before the COVID crisis, but we think it's even more important now to remind everyone that it is very important to support our industry, and that you will find in films and in cinemas something about European creativity and emotions, and that you won't be able to find anywhere else.
So how does the project work? I mean, in terms of maybe where people will be able to access it and all of that stuff.
So you have to get in touch with the team, with the Institut Français team, and then we'll create codes and access to the platform. You have to be a teacher and a student of the teachers that are interested by the projects, and it's all then free. And so you have free access to the films, and on the platforms you will then be able to find some kits, some pedagogical kits to be able to use in classrooms, as well as very innovative and interactive tools. Like, for example, the students will be able to create some mental maps or to share extracts with each other of the films and to talk about the films.
And what is in these kits, as you call them?
It's just a way to guide the teachers through the teaching of film. So they will be given some hints of how they can approach European film history and how they can approach specific films. So it's really to make film education as easy as possible for maybe teachers that have never taught film history in class.
Right, so we're talking about film literacy kits in a way.
Absolutely.
You know, you mentioned this already, but I feel like we should emphasize that the European Film Factory extends beyond borders in a sense. I mean, it will be accessible from different countries of the European Union, right?
Yes, it will be. So in all the media countries, so it's 34 countries, it will be also subtitled in 8 European languages. We've been choosing the 8 languages in Europe that are mostly spoken. So it makes students possible to either study the films in their languages, or it will be subtitled in English, so most students speak English, but also in 8 European languages.
And these are, what languages are they?
So 10 films in 8 languages: English, French, German, Spanish, Italian, Polish, Romanian, and Greek. And it will also be available on all devices, so also on mobiles, for example.
Right. Obviously, there is the difference in languages when we talk about the European continent and the European Union. Is there a way that you maybe will be able to help people communicate with each other beyond borders with the language issue?
This platform enables teachers and students to create groups and communities. So it's really about creating communities that go across borders and to exchange ideas and concepts around film heritage. So yes.
And we will be back to talk more about the European Film Factory, including what European films the platform will be presenting within its program in a moment.
Fred Film Radio.
We are back to talk about European Film Factory, a brand new European online platform for students and teachers launched by the French Institute with support from the Media Creative Europe program of the European Commission and developed in partnership with Arte Education and European Schoolnet. We're also back with Emilie Boucheteil, head of cinema at the French Institute, who has been telling us more about it. So far, we have talked about how it will work. And now it's time to talk about the films that are featured on the platform. You mentioned that there are 10 films, but what are these 10 films?
So we have a wide diversity of films, of genres and of times, of course. And we've also chosen some classics like La Strada or Les 400 Coups, the very famous French film from François Truffaut. But we also have some more recent films like The Book of Kells, an animation films, or Europa from Agnieszka Holland. That is a very important film, of course, for the European history. And so all the 10 films represent an important aspect of European film heritage. And we also chose those films because we thought they all have something in common, and it enables us to create bridges between the films that the teachers can also use during the year if they want to study the 10 films.
Is it free of charge?
Yes, it's all free of charge.
I felt that was important to emphasize as well. Does it also, aside from teach people, kids and also the teachers about film literacy, do you feel like it is an important initiative for the times that we are living in?
Yes, we think it is, because we know that it's very important to renew our audiences for the cinemas, because you have to create a sense of cinema in the young audiences. And we know that if you have the habit of going to the cinema when you are a child, then you are more keen to go to the cinema when you are an adult. And we know our industries and authors need those audiences. So it's really a way to be proactive in defending our cinemas.
Is it also a way to maybe promote an idea of Europeanism too?
It is. I mean, it is. Of course, each film we've chosen have their own themes and originality, and they are all very diverse. But it is a way to say Europe and European cinema is diversity, and it's something we want to push forward, of course.
And this may be a silly question, but do you see this project carrying on after this initial program?
We really hope so, of course, because I mean now the technology has been created, and of course if the program could go on for a longer time, it would be the possibility for us to present more films on the platform. So of course it's a goal for us, and we hope we are going to be able to do that. Is a goal to take it physically? Yes. And do you anticipate any challenges perhaps of running the program online? Well, I mean, there shouldn't be any problem, but I mean, there's a team there to answer all the technical questions that the teachers might have. I mean, of course, you need a good connection, and but apart from that, it's been very well tested, and it's also been developed by Arte, our partner, and they already had the technology, so there shouldn't be any big problem connected to the platform. Well, Emilie, it all sounds fascinating and valuable to me. Anyone interested in finding out more can visit europeanfilmfactory.eu. That's europeanfilmfactory.eu. And Emilie, it's been a pleasure chatting with you again. Best of luck. And I'm sure we'll be keeping an eye on the French Institute's future initiatives, as well as the European Film Factory. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. And my friends, as far as we are concerned, I remind you that we will return to the topic of the European Film Factory, as later in the show we will be joined by a director who made one of the films on the platform's programme. I'm talking about the Academy Award nominated animated feature, The Secret of Kells, also known as Brandon and The Secret of Kells. In fact, we will be joined by the acclaimed director and animator Tomm Moore, who also co-founded the influential animation studio Cartoon Saloon.
Fred.
As mentioned throughout the show so far, Fred Film Radio once again managed to do an extensive coverage of the Venice International Film Festival, during which we covered all of its strands and industry sections. This, of course, was the edition taking place in the year of the coronavirus, and was the first of the major international film festival to hold a physical edition. Despite the challenges of such undertakings, we managed to carry out this extensive coverage, encountering no major hiccups along the way. And you can listen to all of our interviews with the guests of the festival on Fred.fm, as well as watch our video interviews on Fred Film Radio's YouTube channel. I myself, during the 10 days of the festival, watched more than 50 films, which is really a huge number. And while I did not manage to watch the Golden Lion winner, Nomadland by Chloe Zhao, who actually wasn't able to be physically present on the Lido di Venezia either because of travel restrictions, I feel like I watched enough movies and got enough of a sense of the quality of the festival selection to share with you my personal highlights from the program. And that's just what I'm about to do. I'm about to share with you my personal top 5 of the 77th Venice International Film Festival, compiled out of all of the films that I watched during the festival across all of its sections. So considering the official competition stuff, Orizzonti section, and out of competition screenings, as well as the festival's parallel and independent strands, International Critics Week and the Giornate degli Autori. The list is presented in order of preference, beginning with number 5 and going right up to number 1. So let's begin. So my number 5 favourite film was Listen by Ana Rocha de Souza, a British-Portuguese co-production exploring the seldom represented topic of forced adoptions via a drama of 2 expats, down and out, broke, living in Britain, whose lives go from bad to worse after their children are taken away from them. The film is enriched by narrative attention to detail, and I would define it as a modern realist feature that is focused, effective, and at times downright frightening, revealing horrible truths about society and human nature in a way that evokes the films of the greats Ken Loach and John Cassavetes. My number 4 film is Dear Comrades, with an exclamation mark, by Andrei Konchalovsky, which revisits and reinterprets a page in the history of the Soviet Union when communist authorities opened fire on a crowd of demonstrators in the early 60s. And it does so by following the travails of a female communist authoritative figure whose staunch communist beliefs are shaken by the event. Dear Comrades is tense and compelling and equally praiseworthy for its style, which evokes the Soviet films of the period like Ballad of a Soldier and The Cranes Are Flying, complete with stunning black and white photography. And for a more contemporary comparison, if you liked Ida by Pavel Pawlikowski, you'll more than likely enjoy Dear Comrades as well. My number 3 film is In Between Dying by Hilal Baydarov, which is a co-production between Azerbaijan, Mexico, and the United States. I would describe it as an epic journey, the likes of which at times recall the epic and poetic films of Pier Paolo Pasolini. It begins in the modern times, but then fades into timelessness, following its lead character, a young man on a scooter, and his encounters with a number of women along the way, which will lead him to an existential conclusion. In Between Dying is a solemn reflection on the nature of existence and gets bonus points for reveling in the documentation of the beautiful landscapes that act as the story's spectacular backdrop, enhancing its profound spirituality. At number 2, I shift from challenging cinema to a powerful kind of filmmaking that is unafraid to also be entertaining. I'm talking about Sun Children, which I see is also referred to as The Sun. And it's an Iranian film by Majid Majidi, the central theme of which is child labor, and the story of which is that of a young boy who enrolls into school just so that he can dig up a buried treasure for an exploitative mobster. Basically, I have defined the film as a cross between the socially committed movies of Francois Truffaut and The Goonies. And it is a spectacular film that is both engaging and engaged, and its young leading star, Rouhollah Zamani, rightfully picked up the Marcello Mastroianni Award, which recognizes the exceptional talents of an emerging actor. And finally, my favorite film of the 77th Venice International Film Festival is, drumroll please, Residue, the directorial debut feature of Merawi Gerima from the United States. Now, this is a powerful and heartfelt portrait of black life and gentrification in the United States. I called it a cinematic poem that manages to be both tough-skinned and tender, both determined and melancholic. It really feels like the essence of the rise of a new black American cinema shake-up. And given that, as I mentioned, this is the feature debut of Merawi Gerima, the beginning of a very promising filmography. We'll be back with some more film conversation as I will be joined by acclaimed animation filmmaker Tomm Moore in a moment.
Fred.
As promised earlier, joining us at this time is Tomm Moore, the internationally acclaimed animation filmmaker and illustrator, as well as co-founder of the influential animation studio Cartoon Saloon, based in my home country of Ireland. The studio's first feature film, The Secret of Kells, also known as Brandon and The Secret of Kells, is part of the European Film Factory Platforms program. And I'm very excited to have Tomm on the show. So Tomm, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Oh, it's a real pleasure to have you here. And, before we get into reminiscing The Secret of Kells, given its inclusion within the program of the European Film Factory, Tomm, I wanted to find out more about you by asking you a rather simple question. But feel free to answer it in whatever way you like, I guess. And I'm sure you've been asked this many times, but what is it that drew you to animation filmmaking?
I think it was just the combination of being able to draw for a living and draw every day, which is something I love to do since I was a kid, and the ability to tell stories with that pastime.
So you've always been into drawing?
Yes. Yeah. Drawing was the first love and the first reason that I looked towards animation. I think I discovered that animation was drawings as a very young kid by seeing documentaries about the studios in Dublin, and that kind of set my mind on fire at the possibilities, because I loved comic books, but the idea that you could tell a story with moving, talking characters that you could draw was really exciting for me.
And just beyond stories, was it also a way for you to communicate with the world around you, or perhaps to even understand it at that early age?
That's I think that's a question for a therapist. I'm not sure. I think I did it a lot as a kid for attention. I loved that people would go, wow, that's so great. And I think in a lot of ways, that's what kept me drawing. Like, every kid draws and most kids stop. And I think I kept drawing because everyone said, oh, you're the artist. You're the great artist in the class, in school or whatever. So I guess that's probably, I think as I got older, why you want to keep doing it is certainly that you want to offer something back to the world, offer something back to audiences, and that's probably why I keep working, yeah.
What stories do you remember being drawn to at an early age?
Yeah, I'm surprised when I look back on it. Cartoons these days are pretty light and usually kind of musical comedies. But when I was a little kid, I loved things like Jim Henson's Dark Crystal with the puppets. I loved The Secret of Nim from Don Bluth. And Disney had a movie they don't really talk about anymore called The Black Cauldron. So there was a lot of pretty heavy fantasy, mystical and kind of spiritual when I look back on it. I think there were movies that were made by hippies from the 60s and 70s, and I was a kid in the 80s, and I was just absorbing all these pretty trippy fantasy movies as a kid. Right.
I think I was too, actually, now that I think back on it. I like the darker stuff more than the, really kind of the stuff that fluffy. a lot of children grow up having to watch, in a sense, because they're the stuff that get shown more than the other stuff. Just skipping ahead a little bit, I wanted to kind of talk about, obviously, Cartoon Saloon. And, for those not familiar with its history, could you tell us maybe when and where it was founded?
It was founded 20 years ago here in Kilkenny in Ireland. A small group of us who attended Ballyfermot Senior College in Dublin, which was a kind of training college for the Don Bluth studio, but the Don Bluth studio shut down. And we kind of graduated with this love of classical animation and no way to have an outlet for it. So we set up our own studio. And like here in my hometown in Kilkenny, I was lucky enough to be a member of a group called Young Irish Filmmakers, and they supported us by giving us our first, accommodation, a small space to work. And from there, we developed our first movie, Brendan and the Secret of Kells, and that was an unexpected success in a lot of ways, and that allowed us to keep going. And since then, we've continued to make our own feature films and TV shows for the last 20 years.
Now, when you say that one of the things that brought you together was a love of classical animation, do you also mean, and we'll talk about the aesthetic style too, but do you also mean the process in which these animated films were created?
Yeah, 100%. I think everyone who went to college in the mid-90s, like I did, we all were studying hand-drawn animation, but most of the jobs were in computer animation. And computer animation is a fascinating and exciting field, but for us, we felt hand-drawn animation had something that hadn't really been explored yet, and we saw an opportunity to keep going with hand-drawn animation.
What do you feel hand-drawn animation has that perhaps computer animated animation doesn't or offer?
I think it's just a different language. I mean, what does it offer audiences is kind of different than what it offers the animators. I mean, all of us who love traditional hand-drawn animation just love to work in that medium because of how it feels to create works in that way. But I think for an audience, it offers something different because computer animation is constantly being updated, and something that looked really fresh and new in like 95, like Toy Story, looks really dated by now. But a movie like Bambi from the 40s, I show that to my little granddaughter and she's 2 years old and she can watch that and not notice any difference than if it was made last year, because hand-drawn animation speaks to a kind of timeless storybook aesthetic, and I think that's something unique,
And speaking of the distinctive Cartoon Saloon style and visual and aesthetic style, which I feel has become quite famous and influential over the years, it's also like I said, very distinctive. But, you know, how would you describe it from the point of view of someone who has sort of innovated it?
I think we're always trying to be as brave as possible and always trying to make a virtue of the fact that it's hand-drawn, to always use everything that hand-drawn animation can do that other forms can't. So it's a constant, you know, we're constantly exploring the limitations and the boundaries and trying to push them further with each project.
And when you say pushing the boundaries, I think it's a great thing to say, because when it comes to the aesthetic style of your works, it feels to me like there is such a wide range of influences within them.
Yeah, I mean, like Secret of Kells, our first feature was very influenced by Celtic mythology and themes, but also by Celtic art from the Middle Ages and Kells. And so we looked a lot at medieval art, and we were really encouraged by our co-producer Didier Brunner in France to really push into medieval art for that project. And that kind of led us down a road of exploring a style that was uniquely flat and kind of decorative, rather than trying to approach a facsimile of live action. You know what I mean? So that's probably been the main influence that we've continued to develop. And so we're still influenced by, you know, such a wide range, like Eastern European animation, Japanese animation, and obviously illustrators and comic books as well.
And, you know, the times that I've watched your films, including Brendan and the Secret of Kells, I'm just so taken by how just spectacularly beautiful it is. And I always wonder, you know, when you are actually working on it, do you also think about the relation with the immersive experience that is offered by the traditional cinematic experience, in the sense of actually the film being screened in a darkened room on a gigantic screen?
That's always, like, as sort of film buffs and cinema buffs, that's always what we imagine. That's the thing that's so exciting. And it's a little bit depressing sometimes when people say, oh, I loved your movie, I watched it on my phone on my way to work or something. We always love that people take the time to watch it in the best circumstances possible. But I think the home viewing experience, I mean, I have a projector and people have HD TVs, and it's not, if it's given the time and a bit of attention and it's not just on in the background, it can be pretty good, you know. But my preference is always to imagine it being seen in cinemas.
And so while we're on the topic of the Secret of Kells, Tom, let's just take a break for a moment, and we are going to continue to talk about this amazing Academy Award nominated feature when we return.
Fred Film Radio.
And we're back with the great animator and director Tomm Moore. And before the break, we had decided to talk about The Secret of Kells, which is part of the European Film Factory online platform that we have been talking about over the course of this show. And Tom, am I right in saying that The Secret of Kells, which was, I believe, released in 2009, was the first feature film of Cartoon Saloon?
Yeah, it was the first feature project, and it was also really the first major project that we'd embarked on in the studio.
And did you somehow anticipate its success, or were you surprised by the way in which it resonated on an international level, on a global level?
I was really surprised. I mean, the most that we hoped for was that at least the local audiences would react to it, and that didn't really happen. I think we were just too left of field and nobody saw us coming. And actually the reason that it had so much success was that internationally it was embraced, and then finally came back and Irish audiences were like, oh, maybe this is good after all, and gave it a second chance, you know.
No, I think it's I think part of the appeal of the movie, of course, is that while it does draw on Celtic mythology and history, it also has a universal side to it too that people anywhere in the world can connect with, right?
Yeah, and that's even important for the young generations here in Ireland. It's not like most kids going around have all these stories and history in their heads. They're mostly immersed in the Anglophone world, and they're thinking more about Pokemons than fairies. But, you know, I think that when you make a project as universal as possible, but with as specific and as local a flavour, it means that people can engage with it because it speaks to their experience, but it's more interesting because of the local flavour. And the example I always take is something like Totoro from Miyazaki, where it gives an insight into like Japanese day-to-day life in the 1950s, but it speaks to a very universal experience about childhood, you know?
Yes. And, another thing that I wanted to ask you is that, I've seen the film a few times now and even quite recently, so it's fresh in my mind. And I always found that one of the messages in the film that was really powerful was this idea that essentially, the pen is mightier than the sword. I wondered whether, was this a huge part of the story for you?
Yeah, and I think we were trying to make a movie about the importance of art, and it seems like we're always living in dark times, and it seems to be just getting darker. And the only little spark of hope you can have as an artist is that art is still going to communicate for longer and deeper than the latest fake news or meme or whatever that's going around. So I hope it's inspirational in that way.
And we've talked about some of the influences as far as the style is concerned, but when you watch a film like Brendan and the Book of Kells, nature too seems to play a really vital role within the style. And I wondered whether you yourself are influenced by nature in your works, and whether you feel connected to nature as well.
I never feel as connected as I'd really like to be. And I often find that my way into nature is sometimes through art, which is strange, but sometimes when I have to go and draw and I have to take reference from nature, it takes me down and I really look, and it's almost like a way of meditating, because to look and to see is different than to just be in nature, because it requires a little bit more observation and study. So I guess for me, my way to connect to nature is through drawing it.
That's interesting. And so coming to the present day, again, these are difficult times that we're dealing with at the moment. And I just sort of wanted to ask you, do you feel like your work and your creative output has been impacted by the coronavirus pandemic in any way?
Of course. The last movie that we just released, Wolfwalkers, was completed mostly with everyone working from home. We're lucky in animation that it's something we can do, even though it's not our preference, it's not ideal. But we were able to adapt pretty quickly because the team knew each other really well, and we were able to, still have a kind of creative shortcut in our dialogue, even if we were talking over Zoom and working in our bedrooms. But the fact is that it's not just a coronavirus. The world is on fire, and climate change is becoming more and more of a crisis, and species extinction is becoming more and more of an issue. And for me, I just feel called to speak to this again and again, and hopefully someday it'll resonate with a generation that will actually take it seriously.
Given that this interview is being conducted within sort of quote-unquote framework of the launch of the European Film Factory, I also wanted to ask you whether you felt that film education is important, and if so, what do you feel is important about it?
Look, the thing about film, just like any art, is what's important about it. The real gift of it is that it's a empathy tool. It's a machine for empathy, somebody said. And when I was a kid, I joined Young Irish Filmmakers because there wasn't really any focus on film education in my school. And in Young Irish Filmmakers, we discovered a lot of movies that we wouldn't have watched naturally, and we discovered connections with people from all over the world by watching movies from all over the world. And I think the other thing is that, I can't remember who said it, but somebody said that, like, great art is whenever you feel less alone. And I think as a school-age kid, and you watch a movie like 400 Blows, and you feel that your experience isn't unique and isolated, but something that has been experienced over and over again, you can take some heart from that and feel a little bit less alone in the world.
Yeah, and not to mention that it's almost like learning another language, I guess.
And also, I think what's really important is to learn about film criticism, because we live in a world of, as you know, fake news and increasing ability for technology to fool us. And what I learned in Young Irish Filmmakers was not to just be a passive consumer of content, but to understand how it's created and to understand the tricks that are used to create empathy. And so it never kills the magic of film to know how the magic is created. I continue to get involved and immersed in a good movie, but knowing the tricks that are being used makes me a little bit immune to advertising and other sort of trickery that kids are immersed in these days.
Right, gives you a sort of a protective shield against bull S.
Yeah, exactly. And like, that's the thing, like the tricks and techniques of filmmaking have been subverted over and over again by bad actors in our culture. And, I think the more that people understand and appreciate filmmaking and audiovisual communication, the more they're able to look at it with a healthy dose of skepticism and appreciation for the good stuff.
Tom, we're going to have to unfortunately wrap this up, but because our time is up. But thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, thank you too. I'm really happy to be part of your radio.
And my friends, will be right back with some final words and final news in a moment.
Fred Film Radio.
Each year, Fred recognizes the talents of influential, prominent figures of the film world with the Fred Award. And this year, one of our honorees was Matt Dillon, the star of such movies as The Outsiders, Crash, Rumblefish, Drugstore Cowboy, There's Something About Mary, Factotum, and many more notable features. Chiara Nicoletti and Angelo Cerbi were there to present Matt Dillon, who was also a member of the jury for the main competition of the festival, with the Fred Award Venice 2020. And for a chat with him, take a listen.
Well, I can read you the reasons why Fred wanted to award you with the Fred Award Venice 2020. A multifaceted artist, actor, director, painter, and music lover, Mr. Dillon is an inspirational and versatile interpreter whose range goes from blockbusters to indie films without any genre limitation. He often chooses inconvenient roles, showing uncommon autonomy and determination. Fred appreciates in particular the plurality of languages and the eclecticism of these artistical choices, which he has always pursued with consistency and authenticity. That's it. So this is you for us.
Very nice. None of it's true, but very nice. Very nice. No, it was very nice. Thank you.
So let's start from the plurality of languages, because you're here as a juror as well, but you're about to present your second film as a director, a documentary too, in San Sebastian Film Festival, a film that I remember you telling that it's very personal. It's a film of your life about Francisco Fellow, who was also and became your friend.
Yeah, it's funny. It's my second film, and it's very different than the first film I did, which was more of a fictional story, more of I guess you would say it was somewhat of a crime drama with a lot of intrigue. Yeah, that film was a film that I wanted to kind of tell a fable, a kind of a story, and I wanted to make a film which would be the type of film I would have wanted to have been in, say like the director Carol Reed did, like The Third Man. So I wanted to do a film that had this kind of Graham Greene atmosphere. This film is just a documentary that that is a long time in the making, because it started back in 1999. I mean, I filmed the making of a record by this great Cuban showman who was like an incredible performer, singer, who was at that point 77 years old and had not made a record in 20 years. So he was kind of a forgotten figure, and he was exiled, living in Mexico City for many years. But he was Cuban. He was one of the real innovators in the music in the 50s, and was a scat singer in the style of Ella Fitzgerald, etc. So I had encouraged a friend of mine to find this guy in Mexico and make a record, and he did. And then I came along with a camera and filmed the making of the record. My experience with him was that he had no idea who I was. He saw me there, and he thought I was one of the cable wranglers helping the video crew, And then people were like, no, he's actually a big fan of your music, and he's actually an actor. He's a famous actor. And he started to develop these kind of, these ideas that he was going to have this renewed interest in his career, and he deserved that, because he was great and he was unrecognized. He had written so many great songs back in the 50s, but didn't really become a star or an artist until he got to Mexico City. So Mexico City back in the 50s was an epicenter of creative life in Latin America. It was the place where if you wanted to become an actor, a director, if you were a musician, if you wanted that work, the film industry was there. And so people were going there. And so that's how he ended up there. And so this movie is, on one hand, it's a personal story with my relationship with him and his ideas and expectations, his timeline, his life, his legacy, and also a window into the past, into the history of that music, which is fascinating for me, you know. So that's the kind of film it is. It's not like a verite type of a documentary. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are elements of that, but it's, you know, listen, when I see a documentary, I want to learn something. That's how I feel about documentaries. That's what's important for me. So I'm very excited about it, very proud of it, obviously.
I want to ask you a question about your acting career. Just leaving aside the director one for a while, you always, made choices that were not very easy. You never went for the easy roles. Mm-hmm. One example is the last film you did, The House that Jack Built by Lars von Trier, which was a very controversial film with a very controversial role. So what are you looking for as an actor when you scout for films or when you're offered films?
You know, when you're an actor, you're really a gun for hire. You know what I mean? It's a different job in a way, you know. So I think when I was younger, I used to feel I was responsible for every movie, whether it was a success or not. And I realized at a certain point, the actor is like, the actors are the most people in the movie are what the movie's about usually. So it's very important that the medium of filmmaking is a director's medium. Yeah. So the thing I look to do is to work with the best directors I can, because that's the best chance you have delivering a great performance. So, for example, when I worked with Lars von Trier, he asked of me that I trust him, even though it was a very difficult part. So it's a paradoxical thing, because on one hand, I have a lot of reasons to not trust, a lot of fear maybe, you know, of doing something like this. Yet, because he's a director with a vision who I admire, I said, I can trust this guy. And that's what you want when you're an actor, because then you're free to make mistakes, to take chances. And in the end, you potentially can deliver something that's much more really great or exciting or interesting. You know, the results will be more interesting than if you're just going to rely on the things that you already did.
That are safer.
Yeah, safer, exactly. But, you know, it's hard because sometimes you do a film and the director's an unknown. And you have to say, well, we're going to go in there with the right attitude and hope that this person has the vision or the talent to be able to pull it off. And, you know, I realize that I can help often in that case. But, you know, the best situation is to be working with a director with a vision who wants to do something unique. It makes it everything easier when you're working with good people. So I can only be really as good often as the directors that I'm working with.
Here also, as we mentioned before, as a juror in the official competition, what are you looking for in a film?
Well, there's 7 of us in the jury. It's really great to see so many movies and be with this jury. I really like this group of people that we've been together with. What's hard for me is I don't know that I like doing it's not a horse race, you know. It's not like, and yet I'm participating in it because it's nice to honor great work, right? To give to honor great work when somebody does something worthwhile. However, it's not, like I said, it's not a horse race. It's not, you know, it's not a soccer match. There's no winner loser. There's no loser really here. I think there's some people that win out and do well because they get acknowledged for their work. So, but for me, what I look for in a film often is, and it's a very broad term, but it's that it has heart, you know, that it has heart, you know, in it. And I think and it doesn't necessarily have to be a gentle film that's a sentimental film at all, not at all. It can be a brutal, tough film, but I think you can feel it. There's something about some authenticity and heart is very important for me, you know, and what I'm looking for. So, you know, here we've seen films from all over the world, you know, and different types of film. You have to kind of also look at what the director, what the filmmaker's trying to say, or what they want to say, or what they're, you know, and are they executing that, you know.
And I agree. We're always the same people that loved watching films when we were younger, you know. I think that the right attitude will be always that. Even if when you're film critic or film journalist, I'm always saying, okay, yes, I know a lot about cinema right now after so many years, but the attitude, towards films is always the same, to feel it in a way.
Yeah, I had a friend of mine who was a teacher of screenwriting at New York University. He used to say to me, he tells the students, don't worry about the story. Don't worry about the story. Just worry about the characters. Keep building the characters. Keep building the characters, because the characters ultimately will tell the story. I believe it's true, Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys. Thanks for this award, man. This is fantastic. This is really beautiful.
We're very happy that you accepted it, that you were with us today, and good luck with your with tonight's award. Yes. Let's see
the final evening of the festival. Thanks a lot to Mr. Matt Dillon for having been with us, the recipient of the Fred Award Venice 2020. I'm Angelo Cerbi with Chiara Nicoletti for Fred, the Festival Insider. Thank you.
Fred Film Radio.
Well, my friends, sadly, we have come to the conclusion of yet another episode of the Big Fred Tuesday. It's been an absolute pleasure to host you on the Big Fred Tuesday spaceship, calling occupants of interplanetary crafts. Before we say adieu, of course, here is a roundup of some of the top stories from the world of film that have been announced this past week. Let's start with the Tokyo International Film Festival, which has announced the opening and closing film of its 33rd edition. The festival will open with a screening of Underdog by Masaharu Take on October 31st, and it will close with a screening of Okusai by Hajime Hashimoto. The Tokyo International Film Festival is planning to hold physical screenings in the theaters this year, and a statement on an official press release reads that it will do so to enable audiences to experience the joy of watching films on the big screen. The International Documentary Film Festival Amsterdam has announced that its guest of honor for its 2020 edition will be Italian documentarian Gianfranco Rosi, who presented his latest film Nocturne at the 77th Venice International Film Festival. He is the only documentarian to win top awards at 2 A-list festivals with documentary films, and will be the spotlight at IDFA this November with a retrospective and a top 10 program of his favorite films. Physical screenings of the International Documentary Film Festival Amsterdam are scheduled to take place in the Dutch capital on the 18th to the 29th of November, while an extended online edition of the festival is also set to run from the 18th of November to the 6th of December. The Pordenone Silent Film Festival has announced the lineup for its very first online edition, which will be taking place on mymovie.it. It will feature rare films and new restorations with great music, daily links with international archives, classes on cinema and music, book presentations, and other events. The festival also announced that there will be a live event at Pordenone's Teatro Verdi of programs of films starring Laurel and Hardy before they became the immortal comedic duo. And that will be taking place on October 11. And with that, we really have reached the end. This is the end, my only friend, the end. Thank you so much for joining us. You have been a tremendous audience. My name is Matt Micucci. This has been Our Life. I'll be back with more next week for more film conversation. But for now, don't forget to stay healthy, stay safe, stay strong, and of course, stay tuned to Fred Film Radio, the Festival Insider.
Fred.
This is Natasha Stojanovic for Fred Film Radio.
Fred Film Radio, z vami sem Bor Preteršek.
Fred Film Radio, sono Angela Prudenzi.
Essa é Fred Film Radio e aqui é a Mariane Murissal do Festival de Berlim.
Angela Cerbi pour Fred Film Radio, on est au Festival de Venise.
Fred, the festival experience in 23 languages.
Fred Film Radio.
24/7 on Fred.fm and smartphone apps.